because that's really the start of the show that you can still hear us. So I'm going to go through my spiel again. I am Titus Seilheimer. I'm a fisheries specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant. And what I do, a fisheries specialist. I've always been interested in water. Grew up snorkeling in inland lakes in Wisconsin. Fish were really cool. Fishing is fun. And I was able to take that and make it into a career. I work for Wisconsin Sea Grant. So Sea Grant, SCA, it's right here on my shirt. We don't have any seas in Wisconsin, but what we do have, and I'm looking out a window, I can see it right now. I can see Lake Michigan, and we have very large lakes in the Great Lakes. And from the very beginning of the Sea Grant program, we're about 52 years old now. The Great Lakes have always been really important to that because it's, the water is so big, it's very much like an ocean. So I get to spend my time helping commercial fishermen, do their job better, catch more fish, more sustainably, more effectively, get to work with charter fishermen and recreational fishing people and even fish farmers. So, lots of different kind of cool sciencey fish-related careers out there. So it's never too early to start thinking about that. But what we're here to talk about, it's February right now. I almost said it was December, but it is February. And February is known for a very well-known holiday, and that is Burbotine's Day. You might celebrate Valentine's Day, but I like to celebrate Burbotine's Day because February and March is the time when burbot get together and they have their spawning events. So it is when love is in the water here in the Great Lakes and really all throughout really the Northern Hemisphere, throughout the world, Asia, Europe, North America, burbot are there. But they are a fish that a lot of people haven't heard of. And I think it's always fun to really share the sort of interest and love of these unappreciated fish species. They might be in your favorite lake or your favorite river, but if you haven't caught one or you haven't seen one, you don't even know they exist. So let's talk about this great species. And I'm going to shift down and we're going to start looking at this fish. So here we go. All right, we have, how's the sound out there? Is it still coming through pretty well? So hopefully it is. And yep, good. All right, so I'm turning this around and we're gonna look right there. Perfect, right in the middle. This is our burbot. And why I think burbot are really interesting fish species is this is the only freshwater cod species. So, if you've gone to a fish fry, you've gone to eat, you might see cod on the menu, and those are ocean cod. But there's also a freshwater version of the cod, and it is right here. It is the burbot. It has many different names. They're called lawyers. Some places they're called eelpout. They might also be called the methy or the mother of eels. Really a ton of just interesting names. And that can be somewhat confusing for us as scientists because we generally work with their scientific names and then our common names, which for us with this species, this is the burbot. That is our official common name. Lota lota is the scientific name. And yeah, we're gonna take a little tour around the burbot. This burbot was freshly caught last week. Because I am able to work with commercial fishing folks, I was able to send a text message to a commercial fishing captain. He was out on the lake and he brought me back to burbot to use at the programs today. So, great to have these connections and be able to talk about these fish. So we're gonna start right up here with the snout, and I think hopefully you can see this. There is a single little thing sticking off the bottom of the chin right there. You know what? We're gonna take that right in. So right there it is. There's that. Yep, that's even better with the white. So that is called a barbel, and barbels are they're on a lot of different fish species. One of the things that we can actually know, because the barbel, it's on the bottom, and this fish is actually going to use that to kind of swim along the bottom of the lake and sense the bottom, sense prey. And because this species has a barbel present, we can say it probably lives close to the bottom. And in science, we call that a benthic species. Other benthic species you might be familiar with, catfish, they've got multiple barbels, a few on the top, a few on the bottom. A species like the sturgeon has barbels, all benthic species, and they're all using those to sense their environment. The cod in general, you'll see this single barbel, and that's sort of a distinctive feature that we might look for because, you know, one of the things as I'm going to go through the different characteristics, as a fish scientist, a lot of times we have unknown fish species, and we have to go in and actually look at, hey, what are the characteristics here? Can I identify what the species is? So the single barbel, that's a good place to start. Another really distinctive feature on the burbot, on the freshwater cod, is this is the pelvic fin, and then this is the pectoral fin right here. And the really interesting thing, and this is the only species in the Great Lakes you're going to see this in, the insertion or the point where those fins join the body of the pelvic fin is actually closer to the front of the body, closer to the head than the pelvic fin. And why that's interesting, in general with a lot of fish, if I had a perch here, if I had a whitefish, you'd see that pelvic fin down here. And as the pectoral muscles, and what I like to think about is pectoral fins are usually kind of like the arms, and the pelvic fins are usually kind of down here with the legs. So with the burbot, it's like if my legs were up here closer to my head than my arms. So really a distinctive feature that, you know, when we see that, we see the single barbel, it'd be pretty easy to identify this as a burbot at that point. You know, we've got some gill coverings here, and I can sort of open those up so we can kind of look in there, see the gills, and that, you know, that's how fish breathe. They don't have lungs like us. They've got these gills that are very finely filamented with lots of capillaries, and so the water goes past those gills, and they're able to exchange the carbon dioxide in their body, goes out into the water, and the oxygen comes in, and they're able to use that. Just like we breathe air, they're actually getting their oxygen from their environment, which is water. That's where they live. We can look at some of the other different fins. So we actually have right here, we've got two kind of a small dorsal fin. And so the dorsal fin are the fins on the back, and there's sort of a little one in here. But then there's a much longer dorsal fin that runs almost all the way back to the tail. So, you know, kind of two distinctive dorsal fins. We can look at the tail or the caudal fin, and burbot have a pretty rounded caudal fin right here. And the caudal peduncle, if we're, you know, keeping track of some cool vocabulary here, is kind of a triangular shape here, and really a rounded caudal fin. Also the anal fin, so that's on the bottom, very long anal fin. The vent, that's where the poop comes out, but important to know where that is. Another feature here, and this is hard to see, I'm going to bring it up there. There's sort of a distinctive line that runs along the side, and it's called the lateral line. Lateral lines in the burbot, so lots of fish have them, and it's actually this specialized lines of cells that can actually detect movement and vibration in the water from far away. So it's almost like if the hairs on my arm could feel someone opening the door over there. That's basically what's happening with this. And so that's a great thing to have if you're a fish. Burbot like to spend a lot of their time at night moving around. They're a nocturnal species, and you know that might alert them to a predator that might be coming to eat them. So, but it also might tell them that there's some prey that they might want to eat, like other fish. Burbot do. Burbot this size, their diet is going to be almost exclusively fish. So they're going to eat pretty much only fish. They're also a pretty generalist feeders. So, you know, their preference are going to be, because they live near the bottom, they're benthic, they're going to feed on what's abundant near the bottom. Although they might also move up and down in the water column too, or move into shallower water at night, which is when they're more active. So, you know, that's really the outside of the fish. Hard to see, but although it's a really slimy fish, it's really smooth, it does have scales. So they have fairly small scales on here. Some other fish species, I mentioned catfish before because they have barbels. Catfish do not have scales. And although, you know, some people might call these the mothers of eels or the mother catfish, they do have scales. And you know, I guess another thing to look at is kind of the coloration. So it's definitely a brown fish. And when we look at coloration, you know, imagine this fish is on the bottom of the lake. You're a predator, like a large lake trout swimming along. If you're swimming over top of this burbot, you're probably not going to see it contrasted against the dark kind of sand or mud on the bottom. Whereas their coloration, these predator fish that are up in the water column, lighter color, they're going to blend in. If you've ever seen kind of a salmon out in the lake or out in the ocean, very silvery color, because they live up off the bottom, swimming around. They want to disappear in the water. So, you know, that's the outside. And what we're going to do, I think actually, I want to pop this mouth open too, because doesn't everyone want to look inside the burbot's mouth? So it is, you know, as a predator, you can kind of see its tongue in there, and I can kind of feel the teeth, small teeth, but you know, good for grasping things. I can feel as kind of digging into my fingers there, kind of lines of teeth. So what we're going to do next, though, we're going to open this belly up, and we're going to look at what's inside. And no questions. If you do have some questions about what you've seen, you know, type those in the chat. So I've got a fillet knife here. I'm going to open the belly up. We're going to look at those organs, and we are going to pop the stomach out, and we're going to see if we can see what this burbot was eating. All right. So I am going to start cutting, and we want to be kind of gentle here. Don't want to cut into the organs underneath. There we go. Don't want to cut myself either. So I'm just opening that up all the way up to these pelvic fins. Just all the way back to the vent. All right. And I think I will, for your viewing pleasure, cut open the side a bit more so you can get a little more view of what's in here. You know, pretty thin wall of the abdomen here, but you could see that, you know, there's a fairly thin muscular muscle along that belly. And, you know, as you kind of go up towards the spine, that muscle gets a bit thicker. All right, there we go. So we've kind of popped open this abdomen, cut a little bit more to the back. Excellent. All right, how's that look? So we've got a good view. So, you know, just spin around that. How's that? All right. So, and if you had a fresh burbot and you were, hey, I want to have a meal of burbot, because people do eat these, this is generally the muscle right along the backbone. There's a nice brown muscle there that you can trim off and cut into little pieces, boil those up, dip them in butter. You got a delicious meal. So, but we're going to look on the inside and see what we have. So, you know, starting towards the front, right here, this large, very large organ right in the front. That's the liver. And, if you've heard, people take supplements for their health. They actually take cod liver oil, and that comes from ocean cod. But the burbot, even though it lives in fresh water, it also has a very large liver. And that is definitely something that we wouldn't see with other species in the Great Lakes. And so I'm gonna trim this out a bit. And while I was, I actually pull that liver right out. Look at that. There we go. Check that liver out. Really high in omega-3 fatty acids, and that's kind of the good fat that we look for. There has been some interest in the past of harvesting burbot, maybe using that liver to get some of that fatty acids. Hasn't really happened yet, but it's certainly possible. And an interesting little tidbit. So back in the olden days of commercial fishing, they would creosote their nets so they would last longer. So these are like cotton nets, put this creosote on to make them last longer. And it was really hard on their hands. So they had to actually get the oil out of these livers, cover their hands up to kind of protect their hands from, what is this dark organ? So that's the gallbladder right there, really large one, which is interesting. Another sort of interesting thing when we look at, these organs, if we had an MRI of my internal organs, we'd see pretty much all the same things. So, always interesting to look at those parallels in different species. Because this is actually the stomach right here, fairly small. I'm going to guess, and I will cut this stomach out. Probably we are looking at an empty stomach here. Comes in through the esophagus. Food goes down that esophagus into the stomach, into this first part of the stomach. Digested, broken up, goes into the next part. We've got the pyloric caecae, and really this is areas with lots of surface area that the fish can use to really absorb those nutrients and the energy from their food. Passes through that and goes into the intestine. We got our long intestines here. And then, if we connect that out, you actually see this, it gets darker here. That's the poop. And that's going towards the vent, and that's going to come out of there. We also have these two really large structures. And one of the reasons that I'm predicting that we're probably going to have an empty stomach is that during the spawning season, burbot are not going to be feeding. They're going to be really hungry when they're done. So generally when we talk about burbot fishing through the ice, people do angle for them. They will, because they haven't fed during the spawn, they're going to be really hungry. But what we have is a pair of organs here, and these are really big. This is a female burbot. We can tell what gender it is because these are very mature, ready to spawn, ovaries full of eggs. And these are massive. Even though this is a pretty big fish, look at the size. Look at how many eggs that this burbot has. So she's got a lot of eggs in here. And the strategy that burbot use, some species will do less eggs that are larger. They have kind of more resources. Burbot go with let's produce a lot of eggs that are really small. And because there's a lot of them, some of those will make it. So burbot might have kind of our range in Great Lakes burbot, 300,000 up to 1.3 million. And probably 500, 600, or 700, maybe even 800,000 eggs is the average amount that you're going to see in a burbot. So, that's really the main things that we have in here. Survival. So because this is a fairly, their strategy is to produce a lot of eggs. the assumption there is that survival is not going to be great. Most of those, say 800,000 eggs, probably less than 1% of those are going to make it, to an advanced stage, and probably even less than 1%. We're talking very small numbers. But because they produce so many eggs, they are a little more durable, I guess, than some other species. And what we saw in the Great Lakes back in the 1930s through the 1960s, sea lamprey came into the Great Lakes, and they were a non-native lamprey. They're actually parasitic, so they would attach to fish, feed on them, suck out their blood and fluids, and they fed on brook trout or on lake trout and also on burbot. And burbot populations went down just like lake trout at the same times. But when we were able to control sea lamprey, we made their populations go down. They were a non-native species in the Great Lakes. That was good news. The burbot were able to respond very quickly to that. Lake trout took a lot longer, decades and decades instead of, burbot, because they have that strategy of putting out a lot of eggs. Even a few fish could produce a lot more young. So yeah, this fish probably wasn't quite ready. They're definitely the ovaries are, pretty ripe, pretty well developed, but the eggs aren't ready to spawn yet. And if they were, we'd see a ton of little eggs in here. Yeah, we can kind of look. There's some mesentery in here, just connecting the organs up. I think let's take a look at. I'm gonna cut this stomach out because, hey, maybe we will find something. And looking at sort of the quality of the organs, we can look at the health. The health is something really important to know. And one of the ways we can measure that is, relative amount of, kind of the weight, total mass of their sex organs, like their ovaries. And a question, if they don't eat when they spawn, when is a good time to ice fish for them? Yeah, so good question. And really, it's right after that spawning. So spawning is going to be February, March. And so right at the end of that, and even, this fish might spawn, maybe it would have spawned in late February, but the spawning season generally runs several weeks. So, even if some fish are still actively spawning, other fish might just be getting ready to spawn. So yeah, good question. It's, after that spawning, and we would be able to tell, once they're spawned, because the ovaries would be a lot smaller, those eggs would be out, and they'd be ready to eat. So stomachs, looking at the diet of fish, that's another thing we want to do. We want to see what they're eating. And, the science with diet. So, diet studies are something that we can kind of do to really look at, there's seasonal components to your diet. If you're a fish, you might eat different things in the summer versus the winter. Oh, yes. All right. So this, always fun to see something in there. And you can probably make that out. And, it's great for me because when I get a fish and I can actually identify it really easily, that makes it seem like I really know my stuff. And what we're looking at here, that is a whole round goby. So this is kind of the last meal that this burbot had. And so round goby is interesting species. This is another non-native fish, like I talked about sea lamprey. Round gobies came into the Great Lakes riding in the ballast tanks of large freighters. And I'm in Sturgeon Bay right now. If I look out across the harbor here, lots of big ships over at the shipyard. And those are boats that just go around the Great Lakes, didn't bring things in, but ships that were coming across the Atlantic, came up through the seaway into the Great Lakes, actually carried some species like this. And round gobies, also a benthic species, live on the bottom. And some recent diet studies looking at burbot have found that, sometimes a year, especially with these sort of larger burbot, you might see 50, 60, or 70% of their total diet is round gobies, because they, as an invasive species, what we see a lot of times, we see pretty high populations, especially early on when they arrive. And, because it's a benthic species living on the bottom, it's what the burbot are going to eat. So there we've got another, that's another round goby. And yeah, then we can, oh, wow, excellent. Yeah, let's see if you can make that out. Might be hard. So sort of, yeah. So if you look at this, right in the middle of the page, and what we're looking at, you can actually see two little eyes on that. And what that is, possum shrimp, or Mysis. Mysis is the genus, and it is a freshwater, sort of like a shrimp. They're called possum shrimp. That's their sort of common name, but they live in the lake, and they actually move up and down in the water column, just like burbot do sometimes. So they're during the nighttime, they're going to be up feeding on smaller zooplankton, but during the day, when there's lots of light, they're going to stay in the deep, away from other predators, because they're a very large, since we can easily see those eyes, they're a pretty large type of invertebrate. And if you're a fish out there, you want to eat some larger invertebrates. There's more sort of nutrition there. Burbots, when they're small, they're going to actually start out, they eat very small things. Their first year of life, they're going to eat little zooplankton. As they get larger, first year, they might be 3 to 8 inches long. And they're going to really shift to things like possum shrimp and other invertebrates on the bottom. And once they hit, maybe close to 20 inches, 3, 4, 5 years of age, they're going to shift exclusively to fish. And so this one, although it's eating mostly fish, and there are some, if we did a count, we could say there's two round gobies in the stomach, 1 possum shrimp. But obviously, numbers-wise, they're close to being equal. Weight-wise, there's a lot more mass in those round gobies. So, fish, really good sort of food. And, there's some other smaller stuff here. One of the interesting things about burbot, they're living on the bottom. They're pretty indiscriminate about what they eat. So they're not just eating these gobies. They're actually probably gobbling up the goby and maybe whatever's around it. And so some of the diet studies that people have done in the past, they'll find wood chips in their stomach. They'll find plastic because they're just sort of gulping at stuff that's there. Not really, not a really picky eater, just sort of gulping down the food. So, one of the things we can say about the burbot, it's kind of a generalist. It's going to eat whatever's abundant. So if something's really abundant, it's going to feed on that, and it's going to shift through the year as different prey is available. So, yeah, that is a really kind of quick tour. Heart and lungs. That's yeah. So we do have. Well, we don't have lungs because we're fish. So we do have gills, and the heart. Harder to see, but it is up here, kind of behind the. Hard to dig out. On the dorsal side of the body, fairly small. Although what we do have as well, there's also a swim bladder in here. Sometimes those swim bladders will be sort of inflated, and the sort of lined here. This one is pretty well uninflated. And what the swim bladder does, it's full of air, and they can use that to regulate their buoyancy. So if you know anyone who scuba dives, they actually want to have neutral buoyancy so that they're not floating up, they're not sinking down, and that's what a fish is going to use. It's going to use that swim bladder to regulate the depth that it's at, so it doesn't have to keep swimming down or swimming up. It's going to just stay where it wants to be. So that is, almost like a lung. And, another kind of interesting strategy, because it is winter, it is spawning time. Scientists have actually documented that burbots make noise during the spawning period at night. And they do it by vibrating the muscles on that air bladder. So if you imagine a balloon, you can kind of, if you were vibrating muscles on a balloon, you could make kind of knocks and buzzes, and they've actually recorded those sounds. So, pretty cool. If you're up in the Arctic, it's nighttime, it's dark, you're under the ice, how are you going to find your other burbot friends? And they're actually using sound. So, pretty cool. How old? So the question, how old do I think this burbot is? And when are they sexually mature? How long can they live? Generally, this burbot, it's probably 10 to 12 years old. 8 to 10, probably 10 on average. They will live, generally 12 to 20 years on the kind of the upside. Once they get to this size, they're going to be, not a lot of fish can eat them, although there are reports of really large lake trout, so you can, a lake trout can get, maybe 1 meter, 3 feet long, of these really large lake trout being caught with just the tail of the burbot still sticking out of the mouth. So it ate a burbot that was so large, it couldn't actually swallow it all the way, but it still ate it. So, even a fish this size, if the lake trout's large enough and this burbot is unwary enough, something could eat them. They sexually mature, 4 or 5 years old, once they get large enough. And they do have, sort of the first couple years to age 2 to age 3, fairly rapid growth. And then it's kind of tapers off, but it's still steady. The sort of current world record for angling of burbot is a 41-inch burbot that weighed 26 pounds. So, really big around, pretty long. But there are reports from Siberia of burbot getting up to, 55 to 65 pounds historically. So, a really massive fish being found. So once caught close to 40 inches long and almost 20 pounds. So that would be probably, 15 to 20 years probably at that size. Size and age, a lot of that depends on where you're at, how much prey, how warm is it? Fish farther south in the range are going to probably grow faster than, farther north in the range as well. So Alaska, and I've seen some, burbot are, all the way up there. I've seen some great videos from the fisheries agency in Alaska, and they actually walk through, how do you clean this fish? Because, people generally don't know what they are. And if you catch one by mistake, people just throw them on the ice, and you're mostly going to see them in the winter when they are kind of in shallower water. They're congregating together. If you're out ice fishing, you might catch one. But really a good eating fish, and especially along that spine, those kind of loins along the back there. You can just cut little, take it out. It's boneless. Cut it into little slices. Boil it for 3 minutes, dip it in butter. You got a great meal there. You could deep fry it. Lots of options there. Eyesight. We do have eyes. They are nocturnal, so they are. They can use this. Use their lateral line. Use their barbel. They're going to be visual too, especially if they're moving up and down in the water column. They might be, using moonlight more as they get higher up or into shallower water. But generally they're, and they can, maybe sense some prey closer by them too. How do burbot sleep? Burbot actually, they kind of hang out on the bottom and build what's called biogenic structures. And so they have documented these in Lake Superior 400, even down to 1,200 feet deep. They'll actually kind of burrow out these little channels that they can kind of hide from. And that's actually a behavior that you might see in the ocean burbot or the ocean cod species, where they're, you know, big predators like sharks and killer whales. But evolutionarily, they're still doing this in the Great Lakes, even though not as many predators for them, maybe some big lake trout. Yeah, so any kind of last questions that people might have, you know, throw them in the chat and I will answer them as best I can. Otherwise, you know, thanks for joining us today. I think it was, I hope you learned a few things about burbot. You know, this is one of the sort of many fish species out there that you might not have heard of, but they're out there spending some time out in the lakes, you know, doing cool stuff. So, you know, lots of interesting stuff to learn about, you know, new fish species, their place in the food web and, you know, their habitat, what they're doing. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Titus. Thanks for everybody that joined us. Titus is going to do another talk tonight at 7 o'clock, in case you know anybody that missed it. And we'll be live tonight on YouTube. Door County Maritime is our YouTube channel. And, oh, how are the burbot populations in Wisconsin, Titus? We got one more question. Do they receive a lot of fishing pressure?
Yeah, so good question. You know, this is, you know, generally classified as a rough fish. So, you know, not a big fishing pressure, not a lot of directed effort. You know, occasionally in some places, people might go after them in the winter, but that's really only because, you know, most of the year they're in a lot deeper water. So, you know, pretty low pressure, but I think in general, this is not a species that we know a lot about. You know, there aren't burbot surveys. There's sort of incidental catch on burbot and maybe a lake trout survey or other fish surveys, but we don't really know what the populations look like. And, you know, that can be potentially problematic. You know, people might start catching these a lot and then, you know, we wouldn't know enough about their population. So, you know, I think in general, the pressure is pretty low and, you know, their populations are fairly large. I mean, in the Great Lakes, you know, they're definitely out there. They're definitely, you know, pretty healthy populations right now. And, you know, we do see a little kind of incidental catch from the commercial fishery, and some people are able to turn that into a food fish. You know, there's actually some great papers that I've read, you know, back in the 1920s, all the great possibility of the burbot as a commercial species, you know, and 100 years later, we haven't seen that. So, you know, so far, pretty well protected, not a lot of pressure on them. Good question.
Thanks for that. So as I said, 7 o'clock tonight, Titus will be on live on YouTube. Thank you for joining us from Alaska. Bye, everybody.